My name is Gregory, and what happened to me last December still lives rent-free in my nightmares. I live in a small, quiet town in upstate New York. Most of my neighbors travel for the holidays, leaving our wooded street practically abandoned. My girlfriend had gone to stay with her parents, but I had to stay behind for work. So for an entire week, I had a massive, empty house to myself. It was my second night alone. By 6:30 p.m., the sun was gone and it was snowing heavily. I was in the kitchen eating dinner, with the living room TV playing softly in the background to fill the deafening silence. Then I heard it. It was faint at first. I muted the TV and listened. In the dead silence of the house, it became distinct. Someone was outside in the freezing cold, singing a slow, monotone rendition of Jingle bells. It didn't sound like a cheerful group of kids. It sounded like a single, grown man. A heavy knot formed in my stomach. I crept to the front door, unlocked the deadbolt, and slowly pulled it open. Standing in the pale glow of my porch light was a man in his mid-30s. He wore no winter hat, no gloves, and a jacket far too thin for the storm. But the terrifying part was his posture. He stood completely rigid, arms hanging limp, staring directly down at my welcome mat. He didn't even acknowledge that I had opened the door. He just kept singing Jingle bells in that slow, hypnotic, dead tone.
I forced a weak smile, thinking maybe he was unwell. He finished the verse, took a shallow breath, and started all over again. But this time, his head slowly tilted upward. He made direct, unblinking eye contact with me, singing the exact same words without a shred of emotion. I stood frozen for 4 agonizing minutes while he looped the song. Finally, the psychological pressure broke me. I muttered a quick thank you and pushed the heavy door shut, locking the deadbolt. But through the thick wood, the singing didn't stop. I went back to the kitchen, trying to ignore it. 10 excruciating minutes passed. Then, complete, abrupt silence. The sudden quiet was worse than the singing. I crept to the front window and peeked through the blinds. He had moved. He was now standing at the very end of my long, snowy driveway, perfectly still, staring dead at my front door, like he was waiting for me. Anger overtook my fear. I opened the door a crack and yelled, "Leave right now or I am calling the police." He didn't move a single muscle. I slammed the door and ran upstairs to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. I turned off the lights and looked out the window. The driveway was empty. Thank God, the threat had worked.
I got into bed and tried to calm my racing heart. But 20 minutes later, the nightmare started again. Jingle bells. Only this time, the voice wasn't coming from the street. It was coming from my backyard. My blood turned to ice. I sprinted to my back window and looked down into the dark. He was standing directly in the snow, right beneath my second-story window. His pale, freezing face was tilted straight up, staring right at me. Pure panic took over. I shoved the window open and screamed, "I'm calling the cops!" The singing stopped instantly. He stood in dead silence for 3 seconds. Then, he exploded into motion. He broke into a violent sprint toward my back patio. The second he was out of sight, a guttural, demonic shriek echoed through the walls of my house. A second later, a massive bang shook the floorboards. He was violently kicking and slamming his entire body weight against my back door. I could hear the doorknob rattling as he desperately tried to rip it out. I grabbed a baseball bat, locked myself inside my closet, and dialed 911, listening to the horrifying crashes downstairs. Then
Just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Anger overtook my fear. I opened the door a crack and yelled, "Leave right now, or I am calling the police!" He didn't move a single muscle. I slammed the door and ran upstairs to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. I turned off the lights and looked out the window. The driveway was empty. Thank God. The threat had worked.
I got into bed and tried to calm my racing heart. But 20 minutes later, the nightmare started again. Jingle bells. Only this time, the voice wasn't coming from the street. It was coming from my backyard. My blood turned to ice. I sprinted to my back window and looked down into the dark. He was standing directly in the snow, right beneath my second-story window. His pale, freezing face was tilted straight up, staring right at me. Pure panic took over. I shoved the window open and screamed, "I'm calling the cops!" The singing stopped instantly. He stood in dead silence for 3 seconds. Then he exploded into motion. He broke into a violent sprint toward my back patio. The second he was out of sight, a guttural, demonic shriek echoed through the walls of my house. A second later, a massive bang shook the floorboards. He was violently kicking and slamming his entire body weight against my back door. I could hear the doorknob rattling as he desperately tried to rip it out. I grabbed a baseball bat, locked myself inside my closet, and dialed 911, listening to the horrifying crashes downstairs. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped.
Dead silence returned. I stayed paralyzed in that dark closet until I heard police sirens. When the cops cleared the house, the back door was severely dented, but the lock had held. They took me out to the backyard. The fresh snow told the entire story. We saw his deep footprints right below my window, the chaotic path to the back door, and then a straight line leading deep into the endless, pitch-black woods behind my property. I packed my bags that night and never saw him again. But every time it snows, I still check my windows.
It was early December, and my wife, Mary Ann, and I decided to take our 7-year-old son, Andrew, up into the remote mountains. We wanted to do something special and cut down a real wild Christmas tree. The weather was freezing, the sky heavily overcast, and it looked like a massive snowstorm was about to break. When we finally reached the isolated dirt parking area Mary Ann had found online, there wasn't a single other car in sight. It was completely abandoned. We parked our truck near a narrow, unmarked trail that led deep into the thick pine trees. Andrew jumped out, excited, throwing snowballs and pointing at the woods. I grabbed my heavy chopping axe and a couple of strong flashlights, and we started our hike. The deeper we walked into the woods, the more the daylight seemed to vanish. The thick canopy of pine trees blocked out whatever faint moonlight there was. Within 15 minutes, the parking lot was completely out of sight. We were surrounded by total pitch-black darkness, relying entirely on the narrow beams of our flashlights. It was unnervingly quiet. No wind, no wildlife. Just the deafening crunch of our boots sinking into the deep snow.
To be honest, the isolation was starting to creep me out. I kept getting this overwhelming, prickly feeling on the back of my neck, like eyes were boring into us from the dark tree line. But every time I shined my flashlight behind us, there was nothing but empty, snowy woods. About 20 minutes in, we finally found a clearing with perfect trees. Mary Ann stepped close to me, shivering, and whispered that she had a terrible feeling in her gut. She wanted to pick a tree and leave immediately. Before I could even agree, I heard it. Crunch, crunch, crunch. It was the soft, slow sound of footsteps in the snow directly behind us. I whipped my flashlight around. Standing about 20 feet away on the dark path was a man. He was wearing dark clothes,
but he wasn't dressed for the freezing mountain weather at all. He only had on a thin windbreaker. His hands were bare and raw red from the cold. His face was pale, stiff, and completely devoid of expression. When he realized my flashlight was on him, a slow, highly unnatural smile stretched across his face.
He took a step closer. His voice broke the dead silence. It was deep, soft, and completely unsettling. "Are you folks looking for a Christmas tree?" he asked. Before I could stop him, my 7-year-old son excitedly yelled, "Yes!" Panic spiked in my chest. I didn't want this strange, predatory man knowing anything about what we were doing. Marianne quickly grabbed Andrew and lied, saying, "No, we're just out for a walk." The man took another step closer. The way he moved was stiff, almost robotic. "Don't worry," he whispered, still wearing that terrifying smile. "I'm not a park ranger." He looked hungry, desperate, like he had been living out in the freezing woods for weeks. I gripped the handle of my axe tightly and told Marianne we were leaving right now. We turned our backs and started walking fast toward the trail back to the truck. Andrew kept trying to look back, but we forced him to look forward. Then I heard it again. Scrape. Crunch. Scrape. The man was following us. His footsteps were heavy, dragging through the snow like his boots were too big. I didn't want to run and trigger a chase, but every time I glanced over my shoulder, his shadowy figure was just a little bit closer. He never seemed to speed up, but the distance between us kept shrinking. When we finally saw the faint glow of the parking lot through the trees, I told Marianne to run. She scooped up Andrew and sprinted for the truck. I turned around, gripping my axe, ready to fight. The man had stopped at the edge of the tree line. He slowly raised both hands in the air, still smiling that dead smile. "I mean no harm," he called out. "Why don't you get back to your truck now?" He said truck. He knew exactly what we were driving. I turned and ran the rest of the way. But when I reached the vehicle, Marianne was standing there, pale and hyperventilating. I looked down. Both of the tires on the right side of our truck had been completely slashed. My heart stopped. We were trapped, miles away from civilization, in the freezing cold, in the pitch black. I shoved my family into the truck, locked the doors, and grabbed my phone. By some miracle, we had one bar of service. I dialed 911, screaming at the operator that we were stranded and being hunted in the woods.